All right, we are live. As usual, this meeting's live stream will be on YouTube. Standard call conduct applies. All right. I guess John. I think we had a pretty good chat about a bunch of random items last week. Um, added stuff in the notes, but I think um if I recall, the last time where we ended up was for the paper that you take a executive run through of it, and kind of do a edit, see what's needed, and we at this point of the paper we are your minions in terms of helping you execute it. So go ahead.
Yeah, and I know I see the couple of items on the agenda. I don't think it'll take too much time to talk about the progress so far. So I see Mike shared a reference to the AWS training they have, and it looks like you gave the training at Reinforce, or was that you, or is that someone else?
No, so it's literally AWS. I had just saw that somebody had made a post about, oh, this seems cool. I see that they did a training on the Secure Software Factory. So one of the things I'm trying to do is actually set up a call with them to see if they want to provide like feedback to this group, just about like, hey, when looking at this, what were the challenges? Was there anything that they struggled with when it came to training and all that good stuff, and how, how did that all kind of come together? Were there things that were easy? Were there things that are hard? Wanted to kind of get their opinion on it. Reading through the workshop and also hearing their initial feedback was like, it's hard to do this. At least they said it was like an hour-long training and a workshop. So a lot of it was very much in the basics of just getting the like, here's how to get policy set up alongside your CI/CD. That was kind of the gist of it. So I was curious to see like if they wanted to talk more about some of the details there, and if there are things that for a future sort of training that could make it that could show off some of the other things like the workload identities and some of the other things in there. But yeah, that was it. I just found it interesting because I just saw like a random post. I was like, oh, that's nice.
Cool. I saw another, I don't have a link handy. I saw another update this morning. Kubernetes, if you're using CRI-O for your container runtime, it actually can do direct cosign verification now. So all of the K8s images that are signed will be verified at runtime, which is pretty awesome as a secure default. And you don't have to worry about admission controllers and policy and other things like that.
Just kind of curious, did anything like stick out where they were like misunderstanding some of the stuff that we were saying? And I know because they followed. One thing I noticed was on the front page, they're like, yeah, we followed the CNCF secure factory reference architecture. So is there anything that like was like grossly misunderstood, or everything was generally on point? Oh my, you're talking. You're on mute.
Yep. I think on that point, I think it really like it hits almost like the preconditions for the Secure Software Factory. Doesn't really hit that, but at least according to even their comments, they're just kind of like, we tried to do the best we could with the amount of time we had. Because like some of the stuff in there is very much, it feels very manual, but granted, as a workshop, they're probably trying to show like, here's how you go through AWS, here's how you kind of set up the pipelines, and here's how you set up policy within the Kubernetes cluster, and so on. So I think on that end, there probably needs to be a lot more stuff to make it better. But I think along those lines, just even seeing that idea of like folks being like, hey, it's like CI/CD seems to be CI/CD seems to be and securing CI/CD seems to be an important thing for people now, which I think is important because I the thing I would love to see is granted maybe not particularly I don't necessarily care AWS versus something else, but I do think that something like a workshop showing off like here's how you let's say structure your in toto, here's how you structure, here's how you secure the infrastructure, some basic things, and then showing sort of that big picture similar to like what Fresca is trying to do, but maybe in a workshop might be just useful for folks.
I'm curious at a high level in that workshop, did they have chains or was it just Tecton pipelines? I see them saying they're doing Tecton for the CI/CD, but I'm wondering.
Yeah, I don't even think. Yeah, they're not even doing chains at this point, which is
Yeah.
So that's why I said it's like even like the basics of the basics. Like they're just essentially saying, yeah, we signed the thing, and assuming you trust that we're running Tecton correctly. So I don't want to go and like be like, yeah, it's sort of kind of on the same, it's on the way there, but it's not. It's definitely, I would say, it's like a V, it's like a step 0.5 in a 5-step process. But yeah, I think but I think even that is better than like looking at it. Like the thing that I think I'm interested in is just generally, is there interest there? Are folks actually asking that question of like, because I think one of the things that we, at least compared to the secure supply chain white paper or supply chain security white paper, is we got a lot more feedback on the supply chain security white paper, but that's also because it's just a list of practices. And it's very easy to just look at that list of practices and say, oh, great, yeah, we do these, we don't do these, this is useful, this is not useful. But when you look at a reference architecture, it kind of has to be like, okay, are we doing all of these things? Because all of these things are all part of this thing that needs to go out there. And it sounded like some of the initial feedback we got from a lot of folks is, yeah, you solve the problem that I'm going to have 3 years from now, but the problem I have today is not like, it's not how do I use in toto, it's how do I get folks to not run off of their local workstation and have access to push out anything anyway. It's like if I start using, let's say in toto, I don't have access, I don't have any way to gate that. If I force them to use, if I force them to sort of do certain things in their pipeline, at the end of the day, the infrastructure in the build server, they have direct access to the build server. So like there's so many things I think that need to get done from a precondition standpoint, I think first, which seemed to be, anyway, it just seemed interesting seeing some of that initial feedback. And then the thing I'm trying to get some of these folks from AWS to maybe talk about, to give feedback, because I would love to see what is the general feeling they've had. Like, are they seeing, no, people, a lot of the cloud folks are just like, yeah, no, we believe in CI/CD pipelines and everything as code. Looking through the workshop, it did not seem that way, just because a lot of the stuff in the workshop seemed to be, go over here, start up an EKS cluster, click this button, click that button, as opposed to here's CloudFormation, run that, now run this, then, and if you see here, now you have the whole end-to-end picture all kind of set up, but who knows?
I imagine vendors that work on developer platforms would have an easier time doing some of that. And I maybe some of them have already done some of that. I don't know if OpenShift has a like, here's a secure supply chain you can just deploy kind of thing. Which is an interesting question, maybe kind of tying in to the next bullet. Or I just put the link to the Cosign image verification in the container runtime as well, if folks haven't seen that. The tag security future conversation, kind of general question following up from the meeting yesterday. Anything that folks think the working group could do different or better I know there's a lot of presentations for the regular tax security meeting that are or could be supply chain specific. I don't know how many like if the normal meeting would get overwhelmed with presentations. Should we try and break up some presentations? Is there anything we can do to get more people than the 5 of us involved? And Onisha comes sometimes. We have some other drop-ins. If we the biggest thing that stands out to me is like if we change the content of what we talk about every week, maybe we could attract some more people, and try and think of some different ways of working. Yeah, Marina.
Yeah, I think that I think I have mixed feelings about the size of the group. I kind of like it being small because I think we can like get stuff done, we can edit docs, we can do stuff like that. But of course, I want to keep it open for folks who are interested and have questions or whatever. I think as far as things we could do different, I think with the size of the group, I think the presentations make more sense in the main group. If that changed, I think obviously we could revisit that. But I think folks doing presentations probably want more than the 5 of us to be around. But I mean, at least I would, I don't know. I do think one thing we could do different is more stuff on GitHub, make it more clear to people outside this group what's going on. So you don't have to dig up this Google Doc here that and like dig through past meeting notes, right? Just make that a little more easier to discover if people are interested. And I could probably do some of that, and I'm sure the rest of us could too, to like keep that up to date.
Yeah, I was. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to pivot a little bit. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I was just gonna say. So yeah, no, I agree with Marina. I think also, and I know this is some of the stuff that came out of the conversation from just the general tag security meeting, which I believe most of us were on, or maybe just I think Brendan Lum might have been the only one not on that one. But I think the thing that I think came out of that, which I thought was very valuable, was yeah, a lot of folks were saying, hey, the main meeting makes a lot of sense, which I think it lines up with our understanding as well of it makes sense for stuff like presentations to land there, for big updates to land there. It makes sense for a lot of the work to land in these groups. I think one of the things that we need to, I agree that we should make this thing open. At the same time, I think a big piece of feedback I found very useful. And I know that we ran into some issues in the past with this, but I think we're pretty much to be blunt about it. I think the thing is the folks who show up should be the ones who get to do this, get to maybe have a bit more of a say on a thing, which is not to say like other folks who come in should not have a say. It's just that one of the things that we've run into, right, is, and this happened in the past, especially with the Secure Software Factory, was you had a lot of folks coming in once a month and then providing a bunch of feedback just at that time. And then it was like, okay, it felt like the thing kept getting derailed versus just like, 4 or 5 folks wrote the bulk of it. They just sat down, wrote the bulk of it. And then, yeah, they got feedback from the community, but with the understanding there that like the people who showed up get to at least have a bit more of a say, even if there's great ideas from the other folks. It's like, great, if you can show up and help out there, then moving forward, we'll kind of go in that direction or whatever. Because I think that sort of thing has been proven to be pretty useful in some of the OpenSSF groups. In particular, I'm a big fan of how Krobe runs a lot of the meetings. Is pretty much just, okay, we've hit this, and this. Can folks update this document? If it's not, I'm just going to assume by next week, it's going to be ready. If it's not ready, then we're just moving forward with the next thing anyway. And we're just going to, if anybody has any big objections, make sure that they're known before we start the meeting, as opposed to when we're in the meeting and it's like, actually, maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that. It's like, no, make sure that all those objections are hit beforehand. And that proved to be valuable.
Yeah, I agree with what Marina and Michael said. I think the other thing I wanted to add on also, it's not we haven't sent this out, but we had a discussion during the leads meeting. We are going to resume the weekly the now bi-weekly US meetings back to weekly meetings, because we felt like there wasn't that much like things you could do with a bi-weekly meeting. So I think we are doing some of that. We started talking a little bit about maybe having a little bit more tighter integration with the main meeting as well. So that I think that is a discussion that we wanted to bring to the working groups as well. A lot of the initial impetus for working groups was that there was quite a few things that we would want to do in the main meeting, and those like main projects would then evolve into forming working groups and having something like scope for that. Right now, I think there is definitely a benefit of having projects kind of like share a bit of working space as the main meeting, because you get a little bit more broader, diverse feedback for folks that are not looking at other areas as well. So I think this is something that I like to kind of also chat about, that we could I also understand everyone has like a lot of community meetings to go to. So whether it makes sense for maybe on the rotation for working groups to like the month of July or the month of August is supply chain themed for tech security, and so all the main meetings will be more around supply chain security and the work artifacts, and then like feel like that may give a better taste, rather than, oh yeah, we're working on something, come to this other meeting. You want to figure out more, versus like people are already there, they see it, and then they get a taste of like dipping their toes in the water before commenting something.
I think that's an interesting idea. And also hearing from John and the work done on the control stuff, that they've moved completely to asynchronous, which is like, Brandon, like you were saying, the amount of meetings we have, I think all of us have, is significant. And that might address some of the other things that Michael mentioned with the contributions, is like, if people don't get in the docs and write out what it is they're trying to say, it's much harder to ramble in the docs than it is in a live conversation. And also you have to care a little bit more to actually get in the docs and write some contributions. And maybe if we consolidate a little bit, we can always have like breakout meetings or sessions like as needed, just scheduled. This may be a little more convenient for a small set of people. The other thing I was thinking about was some of the other activities that we do, how to bring like an opportunity for folks interested in supply chain security to those things. Like, I actually don't know on the security assessment side, do we look at supply chain security, and would it be possible to like allow people to contribute to some supply chain security analysis of a security assessment without being a part of the much larger effort, or not, or things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good time for the discussion also. I have to schedule another session for us to talk about this during the main meeting as well. But we have that revamp of security assessments. I'll find the link and then post it in there. But yeah, I think we wanna take the opportunity to scale down, but also like maybe be a little bit more intentional. So maybe if we say like general security isn't what projects are looking for. Maybe we can do something even narrower scope and just get it done like within a week or so, type of thing, or a few hours.
Yeah, and then I think the other thing I've seen at the TOC level, and I don't know if it's cascaded down or not, is I think the proposal around doing the annual reviews at the tag level, and I wasn't sure if that's something that tag security would be involved with, like reviewing. I don't even know what the process is. Reviewing annual reviews.
At the moment, I haven't heard any of that. I'm no longer on the chair list, so maybe I don't see it. But yeah, let me add this to the leads sync, and then we can go check back with the liaisons on that.
Because I know there's a very large backlog of annual reviews that haven't been looked at yet, which is like it's hard. As Michael said the other day, it feels like there's thousands of CNCF projects now.
I'm
right.
pretty sure there are literally thousands of CNCF projects now.
When are we gonna change it to millions right now?
Yeah. Oh, actually, okay, maybe not thousands. It does look like maybe I guess between the working groups and everything else, it's yeah, anyway.
All right, cool. I hopefully opened up the doc. Folks should be able to see. I'll post a link in the chat as well, just in case you're not in the notes. And this is really, we talked a little bit about the executive summary. I don't think I changed that much. And the diagnosis was the main area that I was focused on for this week. And it's really like a very explicit, very extensive consolidation effort of like really trying to hone in on almost a rephrasing of all of the problems that we kind of discussed, and trying to narrow it down to one thing, or a small number of things. And so my original thought for this was the main problem is that the mean time to resolution of known supply chain security issues is unacceptable. It takes organizations too long to respond to these issues. Those issues could be CVEs discovered, configuration, misconfiguration, or new threats based on configuration, like at all levels of the stack. It could be something moves from an unknown threat to a known threat, and then how long does it take you to respond to that? And I think that so that initial problem is a lot of the issues come from folks not understanding or not having a map of their software supply chain. We've used word graph. We use the word not a graph. I just threw map in there as one more term to describe the software supply chain. And if you don't have that knowledge, it compounds your response to this. And so I gave the example of Log4Shell. I don't know how accurate this is, but I know at least some folks had to resort to inspecting network traffic and looking for web requests or contents of packets that had JNDI in them, because they didn't know what applications I were actually running Log4j. And like, then as an organization, you have to track that back to like who is responsible for developing this application? Who is responsible for fixing this thing? And how do we track that down? If you're if you are a large organization with 1,000 internal applications, that could be quite challenging. And so you get into this process where or you get into this cycle where you have essentially a manual and error prone effort to resolve these issues. And then because of the amount of time you lose responding to that, once your developers are finally done with that vulnerability, they try to go back to writing all of their code, essentially ignoring the problem that they just faced, not resolving it. And they keep writing their code business as usual until the next vulnerability is discovered. And then if you try to break out of that cycle, you're confronted with all of the complexities that we've been writing about, which is developers who don't want to have compliance requirements put on them, security and compliance teams that are overwhelmed with the number of false positives and vulnerabilities that can be detected, metadata that just explodes as you try to actually generate SBOMs and attestations and deal with all the scanner results and signatures you create. And so that's my diagnosis of the problem of what's stopping people from essentially just doing better. I don't know if that makes sense, if that is an accurate reflection of what folks think they've contributed so far.
I think this was good. I think that feels like there is like maybe a little bit to fill in the middle. So like you say, once developers began to examine their code, they would discover that they are included indirectly or by dependencies. And then we go there once to discover vulnerabilities we finally resolve. The issue is that resolution most of the time does not happen. Right? And so it's like, oh, let's just wait for like Ubuntu to patch it, or wait for like my downstream dependency to patch it, and that's like you're accruing like kind of like security tech debt, right? And if that becomes, yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Oh, no, I was even going to say if we took a step back, one of the things I'd be interested in just better understanding is like, is the expectation here that the executive is like, do we need to have even just like a 1-sentence summary of supply chain security, just to kind of like level set to the folks who, you know, because like I know one of the things that's come up a lot recently is there is a lot of folks are very familiar with, like, especially executives, with stuff like third-party risk management and some of those concepts, and even just sort of tying it back to, you know, like, hey, supply chain attacks, like attacks against this and this, or things that, you know, just something to so that we can, you know, as opposed to just sort of saying purely that, you know, supply chain security is an issue. It's like, anyway, I'm just curious if we wanted to just add like a little bit of something just to pull folks back in, because the thing I've been hearing from a lot of executives is in like, oh yeah, of course, the log4j thing. Oh, that's supply chain security. Oh. Sorry,
yeah, I
Maria.
think there's a lot of like discussion of SBOMs as the whole of supply chain security. I think they're like an important tool, whatever, but I think it goes beyond that. There's a lot of buzz. I think it's turned into quite a buzzword. So I think it is nice to say what we mean.
And then Yeah, and I think each of these sections could or paragraphs could definitely be.
I think SBOM is most for a postmortem, not for actually identifying a problem. SBOM will help us, once we have an issue, we can do a postmortem and we can have a quicker resolution than actually identifying and fixing that in the supply chain. Does that make sense?
I think the idea is that we're trying to push for the opposite, right? That like you want to be able to catch certain things before they happen as well. Like, and not like I definitely like whenever something happens, it is important to be able to resolve it, but at the same time, you want to be able to proactively manage these things and like have a sense of like how deep you are with like not responding to things, right? Because like I think oftentimes like resolving a vulnerability remediation is not a one-off thing. Like a lot of people are still using vulnerable versions of Log4j today, right? It's basically becoming part of business. So like the better you can integrate that into your SDLC proactively, that becomes part of life instead of like, oh, something happened, we have to dedicate some resources to doing that.
Yeah, that's correct. Basically, shift left is what it is, right? You have to
I would
identify
say-
things quickly.
I would say it depends on your definition of postmortem. If you're saying this is after a vulnerability is discovered, now you can go out and find where this vulnerability exists in your infrastructure, then yes. If you say postmortem is, hey, we just got hacked, we want to figure out where the problem is in our infrastructure, that, how the attackers got in, that's too late.
Exactly. Yeah.
But do you want to give a quick introduction? I think I just like jumped into the middle.
You're asking me to give an introduction?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, sorry. This is my first meeting. My name is Nagarajan. I'm a senior architect in consulting company called Infosys, and I recently joined the Kubernetes. But I have been part of the Kubernetes setup since 2017. So I am currently in Canada. I was in the US before, and briefly I went back to my home country, India. And I have been on multiple, cloud platforms for large financial services organizations. In private cloud, in OpenShift. Now actually I'm in AWS EKS, working for a large financial organization in Canada. So that's my background. I have been through, like many of you, the Log4j cycle. And the one thing which I noticed in the last 1 year is, though, especially in my area, right, in financial services, we are having a lot of different tools to identify these vulnerabilities beforehand. But I think how much we can trust these tools. Still, these tools have a lot of gaps, right? There are a lot of misses, right? And we identify later. And it's a collaborative effort from all of us, than depending on one tool. That's my viewpoint. Maybe someone can throw some light on that.
No, I think you're exactly right. I think like one of the things that maybe isn't coming across in this few paragraphs is that even when you have SBOMs and stuff like that, you can't necessarily. Oh, actually, it's. I don't think John managed to get to it, but it was in the last part of the paragraph, which is like, false positive from scanning tools, even like SBOMs and stuff like that, right? You're not necessarily able to trust it 100%, right? I don't think we have the same level of rigor with how we handle artifacts as how we handle SBOMs, and if we're just like determining what to do based on SBOMs, then we're in trouble there. So like, I think evaluating there's this phrase like who will guard the watchers or something like that, right? Who will watch the watchers, right? So I think that that applies here in terms of like, how do you make sure that the metadata of the SBOMs that you're using are indeed accurate, and how much from a risk perspective can you trust it?
And I have one more point here. We use a lot of open source tools, right? How deep can you go with respect to the third-party software which we are using in our applications? Right? So a lot of times, if it is open source, yeah, we can have the access to their source code and we can go as deep as we want. But some third-party proprietary tools, we may not have, much insight into what goes inside. So will SBOM help in that case?
So I can speak for some of the companies that are part of the cyber coalition. Generally, when third parties involved, the SBOM is helpful as much as the ability to perform your internal remediation, and that's what they're pushing for. It's not at the stage that they want it to be at, obviously, but a lot of the stuff gets mitigated via contract terms. So if there is, like, it's written in the contract that if there is a vulnerability or a release vulnerability, that the reporting be within a certain time frame.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think there's an opportunity there as well. Proprietary software can still be scanned. And one of the things that happens is oftentimes the results of that scanning can be worse than scanning open source software because of the lack of transparency. But that doesn't stop folks from raising those issues with the vendors. And I think convincing vendors it's in their best interest to distribute an SBOM for the software they're releasing to help improve those processes. And I've also heard of we've got the executive order in the United States requiring bill of materials, and folks in the private sector saying, well, if this is what the government is asking for, we should also be asking for this. And so even if you don't sell to the government, it's could be very likely that if you're selling and producing software for someone else in a regulated industry, they would also want or have the same expectations that the government has.
Yeah, you're right. That's true. These governments are pitching in because more and more these attacks are very evident in the public space. I think you guys might have seen the last weekend, one of the largest a chain of gas stations were hacked and people have to pay in cash. That has ramifications in every level, right? Governments come in and they investigate and they find out where the problem is, and that percolates to different industries, and they are forced to make a decision on how these things can be managed, right? So I think we are in an interesting area or in times, because we have so much happening around us, and which needs to have some kind of a control, and SBOM is a start, right? It is evolving.
Maybe coming back, since we're talking about the metadata stuff, do we wanna at all mention that, like, metadata can be isn't black and white in the sense, like, I think over here we said that metadata generated via SBOMs, supply chains will explode, but at the same time they can be conflicting. I'm not sure whether it's coming across that you have a bunch of attestations, SBOMs and stuff like that. Not all of them are made equally. And I don't know whether it's just a point that we also want to bring across. I know we talked about that previously as well.
Just typing a note to try and capture that. Yeah, that's a good point. And then so I think we got a little bit of time left. The thing I'll work on for next week will be the kind of the guiding policy. And then I think collaborating with folks on the kind of the follow-up actions of like, if we look at the policy, and my high level idea for this is essentially automation, automate all of the things, especially these security best practices, whether it's generating an SBOM, doing vulnerability scanning, all of creating attestations, signing artifacts. Those are all things, and they need to be integrated into your existing workflows. They need to be something that's seamless and almost able to be ignored by developers because they don't want to have to deal with a lot of these things. And then that would translate into eventually into these specific or concrete things that we may and some of these may be too specific, like use Dependabot or Renovate. But I think there's a general idea there of like put something in place to better manage your dependencies for your software or for other things. And then maybe we can throw in some other business oriented organizational things like if you do a couple of these quick things, you can help prove to your team that this is possible, and it is a winnable battle because we paint a fairly bleak picture above.
One thing I think, so I think there's a couple of things. One is I do think that we highlighted some of these things pretty well in like the white paper. Maybe we want to also cite the supply chain white paper stuff. In addition, I think actually this is kind of where I do think it's really important that we don't end up like long-term clobber, everybody stepping on each other's toes. But I know that like if you look at what OpenSSF is doing, so OpenSSF is building out their quote unquote Sterling toolchain, but really what it is it's essentially almost like a high level architecture focused around capabilities and more of like identifying what the capabilities are. So stuff like ingestion, and then the things you need for ingestion would be something like what you had mentioned, like some ability to auto update, or at least know about new updates to open source software or other software that might be coming down, so that and keeping track of those things. Yeah.
And speaking of references, I was also considering, as we talk about maybe some of the actions for scaling this, calling out to the app, what is it, whatever the application delivery, their platform paper, because I think some of these things we can call out to some other projects as well, like cloud native build packs, or things like that, for like trying to manage base images and some other things like that, and how you coordinate the updates of that, how you can try and manage some of these things at scale. I think once your organization reaches a certain size, you can't just have every developer going, well, I mean, you can have every developer going off and implementing their own version of a CI/CD system, running their own, set of Tekton pipelines or their own Jenkins instance or something else. But that would be less than ideal if you can have some sort of guardrails around that, whether it's an internal developer platform or something else. I think that would be worth a call out here.
I think that is true. My view is, say, if you have maybe a single source of truth at a broader level. I mean by across industries, that would help larger organizations, as you said. If they have thousands and thousands of repos to manage, and developers will be overwhelmed with the kind of effort they have to put in to check this. If we have a single source of truth, saying that these repos have been validated for the newer releases which came in yesterday, today, day before, and you can simply use it without any issues, right? There can be a cross collaboration across organizations to do that, because I see that there is something called open payments forum or something. I may be wrong with the jargon, which was started by Linux Foundation for the payments industry, so that they can work and collaborate on the new solutions for payments. So that is in a financial domain. Something like that can happen here, because we will be duplicating efforts. Right? If every company is trying to scan the same repo again and again, it's a waste of effort. Correct?
Yeah, and I think Michael, we can punt to you on this one, and the possibility of a public good instance of Guac, I think would be, if nothing else, a great starting point for something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think on that front, there's a couple of things, and I also want to throw that over to Brendan as well, since I have a feeling on my end, I'm not funding it. OpenSSF will fund it, and probably with heavy investment from some other big organizations. But I do think, and this is actually something that UK is also looking at as well. The UK government is looking at trying to provide like almost a database of well-known and what they consider to be safe open source software, and help out there, because I think there's so much open source software out there, and it's very easy to yeah, and to Brendan, nope. I think there are many multi-billion-dollar companies that are high-level members of OpenSSF who can help fund this. I can provide my time. I cannot provide millions of dollars, at least yet.
And the cloud credits are basically free, right? The clouds run for free.
I don't know. I've been talking to Brendan a little bit about, hey, do you have some credits?
Oh yeah, that's a whole different story. Well,
Yeah. But anyway, I think the public service thing, super important. But also I think the other thing is helping drive the community to be generating the things we need to make the decisions. So some of that is like making sure that open source tools are providing SBOMs, right? And by open source tools, I don't mean like a library, because that's a whole other thing. Don't SBOMs for libraries are not nearly as important as SBOMs for tools. At least as far as when you're downloading something, right? Because you want to know, what is this tool made of? Whereas a library, you end up with situations where you're like, hey, how does, I know this is a rant, but it's like, well, when I pull down this library, it relies on OpenSSL, but it doesn't, like, it's going to look for my OpenSSL. It's not going to go in, except in specific circumstances, like, the like Bazel or Nix or Pants that do that sort of thing. But yeah, I think like trying to get folks to do the right things on that end and the right open source things is super important. And then I think something like Guac, which one of the things I think is super important is one of the things we've heard from a lot of folks when it comes to stuff like Guac is Guac also tells you where you're missing stuff, which is important. Like, hey, there's a hole, like almost like a black hole over here of we have no idea what's going on. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't have any supply chain metadata, and that's important, right? Because it's not just purely about having the information. It's also about knowing where you don't have the information, and that's often a start for a lot of folks, especially hey, I used to work at also very large financial organizations, heavily involved in financial services, and one of the concerns was always, do we have this somewhere? Where's that data? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the public instance, like, we're definitely looking forward to, and like, I think if it goes well, current plan is to, like, Michael has opened the PR for joining OpenSSF. So once it's done, we'll get the ball rolling on that. But I need to share initial ideas on that. Is like we're planning to do like a more like, oh, here's an example of how an organization would use it put in the data for a set of repositories, and we'll see how that goes. It may be a case where people are like, oh yeah, let's add a couple like popular projects to this repository as well. Maybe that will be useful to folks as well.
So I was gonna kind of tie into that with the last agenda item that snuck in here when no one was looking, which was thinking about.
Do you mind? I have one more comment on the paper that I wanted to make for a while, but we kind of
finish it up.
For the guiding policies, I know we talked a bit about during the previous calls about like maybe guiding investments. So I don't know whether that would be something to be like, oh yeah, invest in knowing your inventory, invest in getting high quality software metadata, and all that. Just a thought. Yeah, that's it for me.
So the slightly tangential, but not too far off thing that I was going to throw out there. I'm good for walking in and just saying, hey, we haven't thought about the distribution problem. We haven't thought about this. And everybody says, oh, great. No one's got a solution to this one. Something to think about that I saw recently was, what's the workflow when you've got dynamic content being generated, artifacts off of your build? So you do your build, you generate some static content that all gets triggered off of I see you, Marina. That all gets triggered off of a commit. And so the commit says, hey, run this pipeline, GitHub Actions goes off. You use some credentials from keyless signing from all these groups, that sort of thing. But then going back afterwards and saying, okay, now we need to add extra metadata to this with something that's constantly changing. The big example I threw out there was the Vex report. What does the workflow for that look like when you've got things like keyless signing, when you've got your distribution out there today, which sends out the SBOM, but now you need to follow that up with saying, okay, we know you got the SBOM last week. You need to get the Vex report for a day. What does that look like when we start trying to figure out how to move this dynamically changing data out there in a ecosystem that's probably well designed for deploying static content?
Are you talking about the distribution or the query piece?
It's a combination of how do we handle the security on distributing these or generating this stuff, because a lot of the workflows we have now base the security around the GitHub Action credential. And so you've got that identity that's coming out of there. And so that's saying this was built from the GitHub Action, but that action is only generated based on when the pipeline is triggered from a commit. And so now you need to do something after the fact. Maybe it's a cron job, but then that doesn't handle some of the scenarios where you've got some user interaction going on in there. And then after you've handled the security of, okay, we published it, now how do we get this out to everybody that needs to see it, that needs to use it downstream? I'm sure some of that, the answer is going to be Guac, but it's going to be dynamic data.
Yeah, this is interesting though, because I think that a lot of the problem focuses on like when clients know they need to update, or when they know they're ready to get a new thing. I know that's the problem that Tuf solves, for example. But this is kind of in some ways the opposite. This is like the server knows there's a change and needs to like figure out how to tell the clients that this is a change, even when they're not looking, which is I think an interesting change to the philosophy of the client server distribution thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think on that end, you have to have, I think the consumer of the software needs to essentially make a decision about how often they should be polling for the data and how often, whether it's Guac or anything else. But I think Tuf and similar, things, I think solve the other problem of the distribution, because some of the stuff that we've been exploring is signing. Like, essentially when I go and do a new GitHub action, I also sign everything with that, including any sort of new metadata or whatever. We're exploring stuff like that. And I think that sort of thing is, anyway, I think it really comes down to first figuring out like how often the consumer intends to, like, I think it's going to be a little bit more consumer driven. Right, the consumers are going to go and say, "Yeah, I'm checking." And I think average, like they're going to check once an hour, once a day. and so on, and then be able to kind of say, I'm going to check that, and like whether it's Guac that does it or something else that pulls that down. I think the things that folks are gonna, I think the bigger thing is more that I think I'm worried about is how do you do sort of a reasonable, like, who do I trust first kind of thing, and how do I know, you know, like it's very easy if there's like a handful of vendors and they all have keys and they all have yada yada, you know, and knowing like I trust these parties and I trust these parties to provide me stuff, even if they are re-signing the you know, they're generating new metadata, yada yada, that seems fine. And you know, for example, if I look at how Cosign or Sigstore has done some of this stuff, I think the worry that I have is what happens when you scale that up to now all of open source, or not all of open source, but at least some huge percentage of open source, even something like 1% of all open source, where we now need to check all the metadata and do a, you know, that's a whole lot of infrastructure.
Yeah. Well, there's also, when you look at the scorecards, stuff like that, they say you shouldn't have any one developer who's got full access to be able to push to these repos, do that stuff. But if you've got one developer is able to generate the NuVex report and sign it, we've just recreated the same problem there at a different level. So, and then you've got to be able to push that up to wherever the artifact was released. And so now you've got someone with access to that, where before it was programmatic in the workflows. So there's workflows, I think, that need to be worked on in that space. And so something to think about.
Yeah, I think one thing that we have like implemented with the GCS collector is like you're able to like get an easy diff of like the new documents that come in. I think with OCI, that's a little bit more difficult. Which I think for the public case it may be easier because like you can just like put it in like a GCS bucket. But if you want to have like a private access thing, then I want to say DBOM aims to solve this. I don't know how much I can say how far they are with solving this problem, or whether it's the right approach. But yeah, it's the echo based distribution is it's a hard problem. I think another thing that has come up within the SASBOM world is like, do you have to distribute these things, or do you just expose the API to query the information? Because some people don't also don't want to expose the documents directly, which runs into a whole difficult like trust verification problem.
Yeah.
We're over time, by the way.
Yeah. No, oh, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think the only thing I wanted to add on at the end there is that's definitely something that I've done a lot of work on. It's like how do you not leak information, even open source information, like I download this package, because then, you know, for the folks who are really, you know, they wear they have the very thick tinfoil hats. They are, you know, I've worked at places that were super worried that somebody knowing that we used a particular piece of open source software meant people would go attack that piece of open source software or inject stuff in there or stuff like that. Or even just the usage of that, people could begin to piece together, how is it built out? So almost like, let me figure out the SBOM based on their queries to deps.dev or their queries to, you know, this package manager. I know that that's kind of like, if that's the thing you're worried about, you've probably solved 98% of all other issues. But I think it's an interesting one, and I think the bigger worry, right, is more along the lines of how do you make sure that when you're doing all this, you're building out all this stuff, you can tag something as internal only, because I know there is a worry of like, if people know that I try to fetch information about internal keyword X, that could be potentially dangerous, because people might look at that and, you know, be able to piece together things of like, oh, they use these pieces of software with their internal thing. Anyway, yeah. I know we're already over time.
Run. Yeah.
Yeah, same.